The ground shook and the tunnel screamed as steel and stone rained down. The alien girl was pinned beneath a fallen beam, and blood was already pooling at her side when the human dropped to his knees beside her. Her leg was crushed beyond saving. And she looked into his eyes not with fear, but with pleading desperation. She didn't say a word, but he knew what she meant. He had the knife in his hand and no time left. Cut her leg off or leave her behind. What would you do? The alarms had started screaming only moments after they entered the deep tunnels of the abandoned mining colony, and the first quake nearly knocked them off their feet as the planet's unstable crust cracked again under their weight. But they kept going because the signal they were chasing was still active, and the hope of finding survivors meant everything to him, especially after what happened on the last mission when he had let 3 people die because he followed protocol instead of instinct. So now when the alien girl, barely 20 standard years old, with violet skin and soft silver eyes, volunteered to scout with him into the black, he didn't hesitate to accept her help, even though he knew the others didn't trust her just because she wasn't human. But in the silence of the tunnels, she never spoke unless she had to, and when she did, it was always with a kind, calm voice that made the dark feel less cold. So when the floor collapsed under their feet and sent them tumbling into the lower shaft, he barely managed to grab onto a ledge with one hand and catch her wrist with the other, and for a second he thought they'd both fall. But she kicked against the wall and helped pull him up, just enough for him to grab the edge with both hands and haul them onto solid ground again, panting and shaking, but alive, except the noise didn't stop, and he knew that meant the structural collapse was spreading, and they had maybe 10 minutes to get out before the whole shaft would seal them inside. Forever they ran, stumbling through the wreckage past shattered drilling machines and crushed bulkheads, until another quake knocked them both off their feet, and something massive crashed from above, trapping her leg beneath a beam thicker than his torso, and instantly her mouth opened in a silent scream. But she didn't cry, and she didn't panic. She just grabbed his arm and pulled him close, her eyes wide and wet and full of terror, but also something worse, something like acceptance. And he looked down and saw the mess that had been her leg, and he knew it was crushed beyond repair, crushed so badly even her species' rapid healing wouldn't save it. And if he didn't do something fast, she'd bleed out, or worse, the whole place would come down and bury them both. And all she did was reach down slowly with a trembling hand and pull out the small survival knife from her belt and push it toward him, not saying a word. And he shook his head at first, thinking, no, there had to be another way. There had to be a way to lift the beam or call for help or stabilize her or something, anything. But she gripped his wrist and forced the knife into his hand, her voice finally breaking the silence when she said in a whisper full of pain and steel, "Do it, please." And then she looked away, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to see him suffer while doing it. And he hesitated because everything in him screamed against it. But then another quake hit and dust rained down from above, and he could hear groaning metal and the slow crumble of the ceiling. And he knew the choice wasn't between pain and no pain, was between her bleeding to death here and now, or them both dying together. And so he knelt beside her with tears blurring his vision, and whispered, "I'm sorry," as he brought the blade to her leg just above the crushed part. And he cut, and she screamed and bit into her own arm to muffle the sound. And he kept cutting while the metal groaned and the world shook. And when the bone wouldn't give, he pulled the emergency cutter from his pack and snapped it in one crack that made her go limp for a second. And the moment her leg came free, he grabbed her and threw her over his shoulder, even as his own legs buckled from the strain. And he ran, not thinking, just running, with her blood soaking his side and her head resting against his back and her one remaining leg bouncing against his hip, and he felt her fingers tighten around his neck just once, and he whispered, "Hold on, just hold on." And somehow he reached the shaft entrance and hit the emergency beacon, just before the next quake sealed the tunnel behind them with a roar and dust filled the air, choking him as he stumbled onto the surface, and the sky above looked like fire, but he didn't care because she was still breathing, even if barely, and help would come now, because he'd activated the beacon. And when the dropship landed minutes later, he passed out, still holding her like she was made of glass. And when he woke up days later in the medbay, his first question wasn't about his wounds or the mission or the colony. It was, "Where is she?" And the nurse smiled and said, "She's alive and asking for you." And when he limped to her recovery room, she was sitting upright with one leg gone and a scar that would never fully fade. But her eyes lit up when she saw him, and she whispered, "You didn't let go." And he said, "Never." And for the first time, she let the tears fall, and so did he, because some choices change everything. And some scars are the proof that you chose to love instead of let go. And in the end, that's what made them both whole. The dropship hummed quietly as it lifted away from the burning planet, and the human sat beside the alien girl, whose one leg was now wrapped in sterile bandages, but the pain in her eyes had not lessened. And when she looked at him, it was like she was searching for answers he wasn't ready to give her yet, because even though the medics had saved her life, the truth was brutal and unspoken. She might never walk again, and that terrified them both more than the collapse or the darkness beneath the surface, because in a world where strength meant survival and weakness was a death sentence, she had always been the fighter, the one who pushed through pain, who refused to break. And now her body had betrayed her, and he wondered if she would ever forgive him for the choice he made, or if she would come to hate him for cutting off the part of her that made her whole. But when he reached out to touch her hand, she squeezed his fingers tightly and whispered a single word in her strange alien language that sounded like hope and gratitude, and suddenly the fear that had gripped his heart loosened just a little, because maybe surviving wasn't just about bones and blood, but about the bond they'd forged in the dark and the fire, and the desperate choice to keep each other alive, even if it meant breaking themselves in the process. They flew through the cold stars toward the nearest outpost, where the healing pods awaited, and where the alien girl would face long weeks of recovery and therapy. And he promised himself that he would be there every step of the way, because whatever happened, he would not leave her side. And as the ship moved through space, the silence between them was filled with unspoken questions, memories of the tunnel collapse and the fear, and the moments when time seemed to stop and the world held its breath. And though she didn't speak much, she let him know, with a quiet smile, that maybe trust was growing, and maybe this strange, fragile connection between a human and an alien was the kind of miracle no one believed in anymore. But just as hope began to bloom, the peace was shattered when the ship's sensors detected an incoming signal from an unknown source, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, warning that a distress beacon had been activated nearby, and that their mission might not be over yet. And the alien girl's eyes flickered with something new, fear mixed with determination. And as the ship changed course toward the signal, the human realized that saving her leg was only the beginning of a fight that would test their limits and their hearts in ways neither could imagine. And as they approached the source, the dark outlines of a derelict ship appeared against the stars, and the human gripped her hand tightly and whispered, "We survived together." And she nodded, because now it was no longer just about one leg or one life, but about something bigger, something neither of them had planned, but both would fight for with everything they had. The derelict ship loomed ahead like a ghost frozen in time, and the dropship's engines hummed low as they approached the broken hull, and the alien girl's fingers tightened around the human's hand, as if drawing strength from him, even though she was still fragile and haunted by what she had lost. But there was no time for grief, because the distress signal was still active, and they had to find out if anyone else was trapped or alive. And as the human led the way through the airlock, the cold hiss of recycled air filled their ears, and the shadows danced on the walls of the abandoned corridors, where flickering lights barely pierced the darkness, and every step echoed with the silence of lives interrupted. And somewhere deep inside the alien girl, a memory stirred of a home long lost, and a family she feared she might never see again. But the human kept her close, whispering words of comfort in his broken attempts at her language, and despite the pain and the fatigue, they pressed deeper into the ship, where the signs of struggle were clear. Overturned equipment, bloodstains that weren't hers, and cryptic symbols smeared on the walls in an unknown script that sent a chill through both of them. And then, suddenly, a weak voice crackled over their coms, begging for help, and the human's heart slammed in his chest, because it meant someone else was alive but trapped. And as they followed the voice through the twisting passages, they found a small chamber sealed tight with debris, and the alien girl gasped, recognizing the symbol etched on the door. It was from her people, a warning for danger, and she looked at him with wide eyes full of fear and hope, and together they began to clear the rubble, fighting against time and their own exhaustion. And just when the last stone fell away, they saw her, a young alien woman, barely conscious and bleeding, but alive. And when the human lifted her carefully into his arms, the alien girl whispered a prayer of thanks to the stars, and in that moment a silent promise was made between them, all that they would survive or die together, because the darkness outside wasn't just a threat to their bodies, but to everything they believed in. And as they raced back to the dropship with their precious cargo, the ground shook again, threatening to swallow them whole. But this time, they were ready. They had each other and a reason to fight, and the human swore silently that no matter what came next, he would never let go of the girl who begged him to cut off her leg, because she showed him what it meant to be truly alive, even when everything was falling apart. The dropship shook violently as it rose from the derelict shipwreck. The alien girl's breathing was shallow but steady, and the human held her close despite the pain from his own injuries and the weight of the other wounded alien woman in his arms. As the stars outside blurred past the cabin windows, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears and questions about what awaited them at the outpost, the alien girl's eyes searched his face for answers that he didn't have yet, because the signal they had responded to was just the beginning of something far bigger and darker. And as the ship landed, the medics rushed in, taking the wounded from his arms, and he felt the cold sting of helplessness as they whisked her away to surgery. And he was left alone in the waiting room, where the hours stretched like days, and memories of the collapse and the desperate choice haunted him still. And when the alien girl finally returned from the operating room, her face pale but determined, she met his gaze and whispered thank you in broken human words. And in that moment, he saw the fierce will to survive burning behind her pain. And though she was weaker, now she refused to give up. And as days turned into weeks, they fought side by side against infection and despair. And the human learned more about her people, the quiet strength that defined them, the fierce loyalty that kept them alive in the cold void of space, and the stories she told of home and loss and hope stitched them together like threads in a fragile tapestry. And every small victory in her recovery was a triumph for them both. And yet the shadows of what they had escaped and what was still out there never fully left, and the human knew that. The choice to cut off her leg was not the end, but the start of a journey neither of them had asked for, but both were determined to see through, because sometimes love means carrying someone through the darkest moments, even when the future is uncertain. And as the alien girl's smile grew stronger, so did the bond. Between them, a bond forged in pain and sacrifice, and the promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together, standing against a universe that wanted to tear them apart. The outpost's sterile halls echoed with footsteps as the human and the alien girl moved through the recovery wing, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and quiet murmurs of other survivors and medics who watched the pair with a mixture of curiosity and respect. And though her leg was gone, the alien girl learned to walk, again with the help of a mechanical prosthetic that gleamed under the harsh lights. But the real challenge was rebuilding trust, not just in her body, but in the human who had saved her life, and in the long nights when pain flared and memories of the collapse haunted her dreams, she would reach out to him for comfort, and he never hesitated, even when the weight of their situation pressed down like the crushing walls that had nearly killed them both. And outside the outpost, rumors began to spread about the mysterious rescue and the strange bond between human and alien that defied the rules of war and politics. And as they trained together in the quiet moments away from prying eyes, they forged a plan to return to the planet, to find the truth behind the distress signal and the forces that had tried to bury the colony forever, because survival was no longer enough for them. Now it was about justice, and the hope that their fight could mean something more than pain and loss. And as they prepared to leave the safety of the outpost, the alien girl looked at the human with eyes that had once begged for mercy, but now burned with fierce determination. And he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, no matter the cost or the darkness that waited in the shadows of the universe. They landed back on the scarred planet beneath a sky heavy with ash and smoke. The alien girl's prosthetic leg made a soft metallic sound against the cracked ground as they moved cautiously through the ruined colony. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of burning metal and silence that pressed on their ears like a warning, and every shadow seemed to twitch with hidden danger. But they pushed forward, driven by a mix of fear and hope, and the unspoken promise that they would uncover the truth behind the disaster that had claimed so many lives. And as they ventured deeper into the wreckage, the alien girl's strength surprised even the human, who had watched her suffer and heal and change. And though her steps were uneven and cautious, she led him through corridors marked by scorch marks and broken machines and strange symbols that matched the ones from the derelict ship. And with every discovery, the danger grew clearer, because someone had wanted this place erased and the secrets buried. And when they stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with data cores humming with forgotten information, the alien girl's eyes gleamed with the fierce light of a warrior who refused to be defeated. And the human knew that their fight was far from over, and that the choice he had made, cutting off her leg to save her life, was just the first sacrifice in a battle that would test their loyalty, their courage, and their hearts in ways neither could imagine. But as they prepared to extract the data and send a signal for help, a sudden explosion rocked the ruins, and debris rained down around them. And the alien girl screamed out warning, and he dove to shield her just as a group of armed figures emerged from the shadows, ready to finish what the disaster had started. And in that moment, they both realized that the darkness they faced was not just nature's wrath, but a deliberate threat designed to silence them forever. And as gunfire echoed through the broken halls, the human clutched the alien girl close and vowed that no matter what happened, he would protect her and fight with everything he had, because she was no longer just the girl who begged him to cut off her leg. She was the reason he fought to live, and to fight back against a universe that wanted to see them both broken and defeated. The battle raged in the shadows of the ruined colony, with every shot fired echoing like a thunderclap across the shattered halls, and the human moved with fierce determination, protecting the alien girl whose eyes burned with a mix of pain and unyielding will despite the loss of her leg and the endless fight to survive. They fought side by side, each moment stretching into an eternity as they dodged debris and returned fire, the enemy closing in with deadly intent, but neither willing to give up, because what they fought for was more than survival. It was the chance for truth and justice, and the hope that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there could be light. And when the human was wounded, bleeding from a deep cut in his arm, the alien girl used what strength she had left to drag him to cover, and as they caught their breath, she whispered words of encouragement in her strange language, her voice trembling but full of fierce love. And he reached out and took her hand, promising silently that he would never leave her again. And as reinforcements arrived, scattering their attackers and turning the tide, the human and the alien girl stood together, battered but unbroken. And when the last shot was fired, and the silence returned, it was filled with the sound of their steady breathing and the knowledge that they had won more than a battle. They had saved each other, and in the quiet aftermath, as the dawn painted the sky with colors of hope, they looked at each other and knew that their story was only just beginning, because love born from pain and sacrifice was the strongest force in the galaxy, and together they would face whatever came next without fear or regret, bound forever by the choice to fight for life even when all seemed lost. If you believe humanity always finds a way, subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories that prove it.